The boardroom was a pressure cooker. Richard Hale, the young CEO with a reputation for arrogance, was sweating under the sharp gaze of international investors. The company's future hinged on this meeting, but there was one fatal flaw: the translator had not shown up. The investors spoke only Arabic. Richard panicked. His flawless suit and practiced smile couldn't hide the terror in his eyes as silence swallowed the room. Claudia, his assistant, whispered frantically, "What do we do? We can't stall any longer." The investors shifted uncomfortably, unimpressed by the disarray. Richard's face flushed crimson. A deal worth billions was slipping through his fingers. And then, an unexpected voice broke the tension. Calm, precise, and in perfect Arabic. Heads turned in shock. It wasn't a polished executive or a high-profile consultant. It was Amira, the cleaning lady, standing quietly in her simple uniform, mop still in hand. The room froze. No one had ever paid her attention before, and now she was about to change everything. What began as a humiliating disaster for the CEO was about to transform into the most spectacular triumph, led not by him, but by the woman they all overlooked. The boardroom's air grew heavy with expectation, and Richard Hale's panic became impossible to disguise. He shuffled his notes, his hands trembling ever so slightly, while Claudia tried in vain to whisper strategies in his ear. The investors exchanged looks of annoyance, their sharp suits and steely eyes radiating impatience. Each passing second without communication was a dagger to Richard's carefully crafted reputation as a confident leader. "Perhaps we should reschedule," Richard stammered, his voice cracking just enough for the board members to wince. The words hung in the air like poison. Reschedule? It was the worst thing he could suggest. To admit failure in front of these investors was to invite ridicule, even ruin. A chuckle came from one of the investors, followed by a dismissive shake of the head. Richard's cheeks burned red. He had worked tirelessly to create the image of a visionary CEO, but here he was, reduced to a desperate figure unable to control his own meeting. Claudia's eyes darted around the room until they landed on Amira, the cleaning lady quietly working near the corner. Claudia scoffed under her breath, muttering, "At least she's good for wiping floors. Not much else." Her words were cruel, meant only for Richard, but they carried farther than intended. Amira heard. Amira lowered her gaze, focusing on her mop, pretending she hadn't caught the insult. She was used to it, being invisible, being underestimated, being diminished. It had become the soundtrack of her life in this tower of glass and marble. The humiliation intensified when Richard, desperate for a way out, tried a few words in broken Arabic. His accent was disastrous. The investors frowned, one even suppressing laughter. It was like watching a man try to dance in shoes 3 sizes too small. Painful, awkward, and unforgettable, for all the wrong reasons. "Stop," one of the investors said firmly in Arabic, waving a hand as if shooing away a child's foolish game. Though Richard didn't understand the words, he understood the tone. His heart sank. The board members shifted uncomfortably. They had staked their trust, and their reputations, on Richard's leadership. And now, with every clumsy second, his mask of authority crumbled. Claudia tried to salvage the moment, forcing a smile. "They'll understand we're experiencing a minor delay," she whispered. But the truth was clear: the CEO had failed. Amira felt a knot tighten in her chest. She had been silent for so long, watching from the shadows. She knew this language, knew every curve and rhythm of it. But revealing her skill here, in this environment where her presence barely registered, was unthinkable. Richard glanced again at the investors, their expressions now hardened into disdain. He could almost hear the whispers that would spread after this disaster: the young CEO who couldn't even secure a translator. The arrogant leader undone by his own negligence. His career might never recover. Then came the breaking point. One investor leaned back in his chair, speaking sharply in Arabic. Though Richard couldn't decipher the words, the tone dripped with insult. The other investors smirked, amused at the spectacle of a supposedly powerful man squirming before them. Richard's eyes widened. He knew mockery when he saw it. The humiliation was now complete, not only in front of his board but also in front of the very people he had hoped to impress. His legacy, his authority, was collapsing in real time. Claudia leaned in again. "We can still spin this," she muttered. But Richard barely heard her. His thoughts were spiraling, his chest tightening. That's when the challenge was spoken. One of the investors, irritated and unimpressed, slammed a hand on the table. In Arabic, he declared, "If your company has no one who respects our language enough to speak it, then prove your worth another way. Present your proposal, here and now. If you fail, the deal is dead." The room erupted in murmurs. The board members' faces turned pale. Richard's hands went clammy as the ultimatum registered. This was no longer just about embarrassment. This was about survival. Billions of dollars, years of planning, the company's entire future, all now hinged on a challenge that seemed utterly impossible. And in the back of the room, Amira tightened her grip on the mop handle, her heart pounding. She knew she couldn't stay silent much longer. Right now, the tension in that boardroom is unbearable. The CEO is crumbling, the investors are mocking, and Amira, the invisible cleaning lady, is the only one who could possibly save the day. But before we see if she dares to step forward, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt underestimated, treated as if your value was invisible? If this story is striking a chord with you, make sure to hit that subscribe button. This channel is all about powerful stories where the overlooked rise to shine, and I don't want you to miss a single one. Go ahead, join our community, and let's keep these stories alive together. Amira's breath caught in her throat as the echo of the investor's ultimatum filled the boardroom. For a moment, she tightened her grip on the mop, her pulse racing in her ears. She had lived her entire life learning when to stay silent, when to step aside. But something deep inside her stirred now, an ache born from years of invisibility. She couldn't watch this collapse happen, not when she held the very key everyone was missing. She took a slow step forward. The sound of her shoes against the polished floor drew only a flicker of attention at first. Then she spoke. In perfect, fluid Arabic, her voice steady as stone, Amira addressed the investors. "Gentlemen, the proposal can indeed be presented. Allow me to assist." The words cut through the room like lightning. Every head turned. Richard froze, blinking as if he'd seen a ghost. Claudia's mouth fell open, her lips forming a silent what. The investors straightened in their seats, stunned by the clarity and authority in Amira's tone. For years they had passed her by, a shadow in the corner of their glittering offices. But now, in an instant, she was the center of the room. Richard's voice cracked. You speak Arabic?" His disbelief bled into anger, as though Amira had betrayed him by hiding a skill he never bothered to imagine she possessed. Amira did not flinch. She met the CEO's gaze calmly, then turned back to the investors and continued in Arabic, her words weaving effortlessly. She explained that the company valued this partnership deeply, that there had been an unfortunate misunderstanding with the translator, but that the presentation could proceed without delay. The investors leaned forward, their expressions softening from disdain to intrigue. One of them, a silver-haired man with an air of authority, asked her a sharp question, testing her. Without hesitation, Amira answered with precision, her vocabulary rich and elegant, her cadence dignified. The man's stern facade cracked into a nod of respect. Around the table, the atmosphere shifted. What had been mockery just moments ago began to morph into curiosity. Could this woman, this cleaner, truly carry the meeting on her shoulders? Claudia hissed at Richard in a whisper, "We can't let her steal this moment. Do something." But Richard was paralyzed, his carefully built mask of control shattered. He had no choice but to sit back and watch. Amira, meanwhile, stepped closer to the screen where the presentation materials waited. With calm assurance, she gestured to the slides and began translating Richard's prepared remarks. Each sentence came alive in Arabic, no longer hollow bullet points but flowing explanations rich with nuance. The investors listened intently. Some even smiled, their earlier skepticism melting into admiration. It wasn't just the words, it was the way Amira delivered them, with dignity, with confidence, with the subtle authority of someone who not only spoke their language but respected it. Every sentence she spoke widened the crack in the wall of arrogance that had loomed over her for so long. And though Richard shifted in his chair, humiliated by his dependence on her, the room had already chosen who held the true power in this moment. The first act of the miracle was complete. The cleaning lady had transformed into the voice of the corporation. But the greatest test, and the most dramatic turn, was still ahead. The longer Amira spoke, the more the energy in the room shifted. Where moments earlier there had been scorn, now there was silence laced with awe. Investors leaned in, nodding slowly as if each word carried unexpected weight. Amira wasn't simply translating, she was interpreting, giving meaning to Richard's bland corporate phrases, turning lifeless jargon into compelling vision. The silver-haired investor who had tested her earlier finally raised his hand, cutting through the hush. His question, delivered in rapid Arabic, demanded clarification on a critical point in the company's strategy. The board members stiffened. Even Richard knew this was the part of the plan that was weakest. A stumble here could unravel everything. But Amira didn't stumble. She inhaled softly, then answered with elegant precision. She reframed the flaw into an opportunity, explaining with calm logic and cultural sensitivity why the company's approach aligned with long-term regional goals. She didn't merely repeat what Richard had written, she elevated it, wrapped it in layers of understanding that no executive in the room could have achieved. The investor's hard eyes softened. Slowly, he smiled. "Impressive," he said, in English this time, so that everyone could hear. The single word struck like thunder. Respect had shifted sides. Gasps rippled among the board members. Claudia looked as if she'd swallowed a stone. Richard sat frozen, his lips pressed tight, a bead of sweat sliding down his temple. This was supposed to be his victory, his moment of dominance. Instead, it was Amira, the woman he had never noticed, who now commanded the room. The investors exchanged murmurs among themselves, some gesturing toward Amira as though she were the one presenting the deal. Their eyes no longer lingered on Richard but on her, the quiet force who had emerged from the margins. Then came the climax. The lead investor stood, placing his palms flat on the table. In Arabic, he declared, "If this woman speaks for your company, then your company has our respect. We accept the partnership." Applause erupted, not polite, but thunderous. The deal was sealed. The humiliation that had loomed over Richard only moments before had been transformed into triumph, but it was not his. It belonged to Amira. The board members exchanged stunned looks, whispering frantically about what had just happened. Richard forced a smile, trying to reclaim the moment, but his eyes betrayed him. He knew. Everyone knew. The CEO had not saved the company. The cleaning lady had. As the investors rose to shake hands, one of them bypassed Richard entirely and extended his hand directly to Amira. She accepted it with grace, her modest uniform a stark contrast to the luxury around her. Yet in that handshake, she stood taller than anyone else in the room. The climax had arrived, the invisible woman had become unforgettable. The boardroom still buzzed with applause, but as the echoes faded, the reality of what had just unfolded sank in. Amira, the woman who had always been invisible, stood at the center of admiration. Her calm demeanor hadn't changed, but her presence radiated a quiet power that no one could ignore any longer. Richard forced a stiff smile, attempting to step forward as though he had orchestrated the entire moment. "Yes, well," he began in his polished CEO voice, "we are, of course, grateful that our team could." But the investors weren't listening. Their attention was still fixed on Amira. One even raised a hand to interrupt Richard and addressed her directly in Arabic, "You are the reason this partnership is possible." Your words carried sincerity. The statement left Richard speechless. His mask of control cracked again, and behind him, the board members exchanged uneasy glances. They knew what this meant. Richard's authority had been undermined, not by sabotage, but by his own blindness. Claudia, meanwhile, tried to salvage her pride. "She just cleans," she whispered bitterly to a colleague. But her words fell flat. Everyone had witnessed the truth. The cleaner had done what no executive in the room could. The investors moved to finalize documents, shaking hands warmly with Amira. They treated Richard as little more than a formality, a background figure. The humiliation burned deeper for him than any insult could. He had been revealed as powerless without the woman he had overlooked. Justice, however, was not only humiliation. It carried consequences. In the weeks that followed, whispers spread across the industry. Richard Hale, once the young star of corporate leadership, became the CEO whose meeting was saved not by his brilliance but by the cleaning lady he never respected. His reputation for arrogance soured further, and board members began questioning whether he was truly the leader they needed. Claudia, too, felt the sting of karma. Her condescending remarks about Amira were remembered by those who had overheard. In the office corridors, her sharp tongue no longer impressed, it repelled. She found herself sidelined, trusted less and less, her ambitions crumbling under the weight of her own arrogance. And Amira? She did not ask for glory. After the meeting ended and the investors departed, she simply picked up her mop again. The executives tried to speak to her, fumbling with apologies and awkward gratitude, but she brushed it aside gently. "I only did what was needed," she said. She returned to her routine, polishing marble floors and emptying bins, yet everything had changed. People greeted her now, some with shame in their eyes, others with newfound respect. But Amira remained the same, humble, grounded, uninterested in climbing into their gilded world. One evening, as the sun set against the skyscraper's glass, Amira walked home with the same modest stride she always had. Yet there was a lightness in her steps, a quiet pride in knowing she had stood tall when it mattered most. Her worth had never depended on recognition. But for once, the world had seen her clearly. The justice was complete. The arrogant were humbled. The invisible became unforgettable. And Amira carried on, not as the cleaning lady defined by others, but as the woman who had reminded them all what true value looked like. And that's how a simple cleaning lady became the true voice of power in a room full of elites. Amira's story reminds us that real value doesn't come from titles, wealth, or appearances. It comes from authenticity, skill, and courage. The world may overlook people like her, but moments like this prove that greatness can shine from the most unexpected places. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated, only to surprise everyone with what you were truly capable of? Share your story in the comments. I want this community to be a place where invisible voices are finally heard. And if this story inspired you, make sure to follow this channel so you don't miss the next tale of resilience and triumph. Together, we can celebrate the overlooked and give strength to every hidden talent waiting to be seen.